James Lipton's Inside, starting from page 127. Chapter 6. The force that through the green fuse drives the flower, drives my green age. A quote from Dylan Thomas. 10 years went by in a flood of academic exploration. While I was probing the mysteries of acting and directing and modern dance and ballet and the Italian art song and the Broadway ballad, and testing what I'd learned on the stage and screen, I augmented my curriculum at several of the city's universities with the continuing study of French and literature and philosophy and symbolic truth-functional logic. Wayne University had taught Aristotelian categorical logic and art and music history and filmmaking, always for credit in order to pit myself against the course's exams. As I made my way through the groves of academe, I became fully engaged in my various pursuits full-time. A film called Wheel of Fire took me to Europe. When I was 10, I used to spend each Saturday afternoon at the J.L. Hudson Company, where my mother ran a circulating library in the book department, which occupied half a city block, Autres Temps, Autres Mœurs, of one of the largest department stores in America. After browsing the library for the weekly stack of books Mother would check out for me, I'd roam Hudson's dazzling bazaar, always winding up for at least an hour, leaning on the counter of the Ask Mr. Foster Travel Bureau, gazing longingly at the posters of exotic places, Africa, London, Rome, Paris, that might as well have been Mars. Wheel of Fire was scheduled to be filmed in Greece, where I would play the leading role, but the director phoned me when I arrived in Paris, instructing me to remain there, at the company's expense, while they continued to wend their way through the Greek bureaucracy as they prepared the shoot. Faced with this ultimate hardship assignment, I tried to disguise my joy. On my first night in Paris, my first night anywhere outside the United States apart from Windsor, Ontario, I asked the concierge of the Hotel du Mini to recommend a nearby restaurant, and he pointed me towards Chez Pierre à la Fontaine-Galion. As I walked there on an early March night, the Paris streets were dark and cold and wet and indescribably beautiful. Everywhere I looked, the posters of the Ask Mr. Foster Travel Bureau smiled back at me. Because it was March, there were no tourists crowding the streets. Paris was still recovering from the trauma of the war years, which is to say, it was still in many respects the Paris of the 20s and 30s, when it was the cynosure of the civilized world. When I arrived at Chez Pierre, it was nearly empty. On this first night of a startling new life, I took my place on a banquet, and as I picked up the menu, I hoped the waiter wouldn't notice that my hand was shaking. When I ordered dinner in my college French, I would have been more comfortable and comprehensible in Latin. I was suddenly confronted with a mysterious creature, my first sommelier. Desperate not to be perceived as gauche or louche, I scrutinized the wine list he handed me, recognized nothing, put it down, and said, as casually and world-wearily as I could, "I think tonight I'll just have your vin rouge ordinaire." The sommelier paused for an instant, then nodded and vanished. I was relieved when he reappeared with red wine in a carafe. I was halfway through my dinner and beginning to feel French in my fingertips when the epimonious Pierre showed up and, seeing me, and seeing through me, came to my table with a smile to ask if I was enjoying my dinner. I replied smoothly that I was. Glancing at the carafe, he asked what wine I ordered, and I committed my first gaffe. I ordered the vin ordinaire. He drew himself up. "We don't serve vin ordinaire." Well, that's what I ordered," he sputtered, exposed as a parvenu on my first night in Paris. Taking pity on me, he summoned the hovering sommelier with a snap of his fingers and asked for a glass. Filling it from my carafe, he took a sip, and his face fell. "Oh, monsieur," he exclaimed, "I'm so sorry." "Why?" "This wine," he said, staring at it as he swirled it slowly, "is for certain occasions." Feeling very uncultivated and American, I asked, "Such as?" Still staring at the wine with narrowed eyes, he said, "You have just learned that your mother is ill," and directed a questioning glance at me. I shook my head, and he resumed the litany. "Your favorite uncle has been arrested for an unspeakable perversion." I shook my head. He continued, one long, unbroken breath now, glancing at me from each disavowal. "Your rich aunt has died and left you out of the will. You've discovered that your mistress is deceiving you." We were entering uncharted waters. Seeing my expression, he veered to a less sophisticated track. "Your dog has been run over. You've lost your last sou at the chemin de fer. You've contracted a venereal disease. There were more, but those were the ones that stick in my memory." Finally, he ran out of citations or breath. "None of them? Nothing like that?" "No," I said, abandoning a terrible performance. I could hear Stella screaming, "Indicating!" and opting for my only remaining option, honesty. "It's just the opposite. This is my first night in Paris, in Europe. I've never been so happy in my life." His eyes lit up. "Ah." He snapped his fingers and murmured something to the sommelier, who hurried away and returned in a moment with a bottle of wine, which he opened with a flourish and poured into 2 new glasses. Pierre sat down at my table. "Now taste your wine." I took a sip of the first wine. He pushed my water glass to me. "A little water. Now this wine." He sipped from his glass as I followed his instructions. It was a thunderbolt. I'd never sampled 2 tastes side by side. Even to this neophyte, the 2 wines were now as unlike as syrup and vinegar. "Which one do you prefer?" Pierre asked. "This one," I said, brandishing the new glass. "Of course," he said, regarding the wine deferentially as he revisited his litany. "Your mother was ill, but you've just learned she's going to recover. Your favorite uncle has been cleared of all charges with an apology from the little girl. Your rich aunt has died and left you everything. You've got a fabulous new mistress. Your dog has been run over, but by you in a brand-new citron. You've made a killing at the racetrack. Your worst enemy has contracted a venereal disease." Pierre remained at my table, and a man who was watching the spectacle with evident amusement from an opposite table got up and joined us. The 3 of us polished off the favored bottle of wine as the newcomer, who was a Swiss businessman in town for 2 days, explained that he bought 2 of the best seats for the Folie Bergères and had come to Chpt in hope of finding a young woman who might be interested in his company. "But," he said, gesturing at the empty restaurant, "Pierre, our genial Boniface, genially suggested notre ami américain." The Swiss concurred, and my first evening in Paris ended at the Folie Bergère, the charms of which hadn't been so much as hinted at by the posters lining the walls of "Ask Mr. Foster." Clearly, I concluded, Mr. Foster had led a pathetically sheltered existence.